Well, the analysts and investors that I've talked to say the more information they get in an easy, understandable form is what they like. You know, all of us can find information if we go on the Internet and spend hours looking for it and researching it. But if it's in a format that's usable, turn that off, then it's much, much better to use. Now, I believe in the testimony of Professor Gabaldon, by the way, thank you all for being here, and thank the Chairman and my colleagues for bringing these bills forward. But you testified that over time the cost will continue to go down. And there was one study from the CPAs, the American Institute of CPAs, that estimated the median cost of doing XBRL for a company would be roughly $8,000. I don't see that as onerous. And I'm concerned, I'm all for small companies, but the more information you have easily attainable means investors will be more likely to invest in it. And I'd like to ask Professor Gabaldon, do you think people are more likely to invest in a company that has data they understand, or in a dark pool where they don't understand it and it's not out there?
I most definitely think they're more willing to invest in companies about which there is easily accessible information.
Right. I agree. And I think this debate reminds me somewhat about our debate on Sarbanes-Oxley, where everyone was opposed to it. Industry was opposed to it. Well, it had gotten to the point when major companies crashed overnight, losing their pensions, going bankrupt, dragging this country down, that there wasn't faith in the system. So we brought all the dark money back onto the balance sheets. The cost of complying keeps going down every year, and now no one's complaining about it. And hopefully we won't have an example of a company that crashes with a grade A rating overnight, bringing down and losing jobs and disrupting the economy. Now, I'd like to ask Professor Gabaldon, I'd like to ask you really about the XBRL. I think this is an important debate. And in your testimony, you noted that in H.R. 1965, which exempts a large number of public companies from the requirement to use XBRL, would be a step backwards. Now, why do you see this as a step backwards? Could you elaborate a little bit?
That would basically permit 60% of the publicly traded companies in America not to use this tool, which is, I believe, an important research tool for investors, and certainly also a useful tool for the SEC as it evaluates both filers and also goes through the exercise of considering its own regulations. In addition to the figure that you mentioned earlier, it appears that of small reporting companies, 69% incur annual costs of $10,000 or less annually. In the UK, where they have some experience with this, some filings have come down to approximately £100 per filing, or $150.
Now, I have another question. This bill before us is intended to help small companies, but in my opinion, I believe that it hurts small companies, because if small companies aren't included in the data sets that analysts and investors use to analyze industries and make investments, then they're unlikely to attract much attention from the markets. You know, investing I think most people, investors, large and small, want as much information as possible. So my question is, in addition to putting investors, analysts, regulators, and researchers at a disadvantage, do you think the bill would even put small companies at a disadvantage? And again, back to the Professor.
I do, and I think that could happen on an individual basis as well as on a composite basis. If the United States has a reputation for permitting 60% of its companies not to provide this information, whereas other countries do provide this information in readily accessible form, the overseas investors who are going to be interested in looking at American investment opportunities is going to decline.
Okay, I've always said that markets run more on trust than on capital. And one of the things that our economies had is more trust than other economies. People want to invest in America because they trust our regulation, they trust our markets, they trust our workers. And I think we have a responsibility to keep that standard. And I feel that excluding 60% of the companies from disclosure is not the right way to go. My time has expired, so thank you very much.